Pax vobiscum. Welcome back to the channel, and to another episode of The Vestal Virgin Reads. Today we are going to continue our reading of Character, the Grandest Thing in the World by Orison Swett Marden, with Chapter 6, A Fragment of the Rock of Ages. Last summer, two young Creek braves, Watka and Deer, met at a dance. They were suitors for the same maiden who was present. Trouble arose. There was a short fight resulting in the death of Deer. For this homicide, Watka was tried under the laws of his tribe, was found guilty of murder, and sentenced to be shot at a date early in August. Immediately on the conviction, the condemned man was released on parole, as others in the same circumstances had been, it not being an infrequent tribal custom. No bond, no surety of any kind, nothing but his pledge to report for execution was required. Watka could kill his rival in love in the heat of passion, but he would not violate his promise to save his life. He married the girl on whose account he had fought and killed Deer, and when the day of execution approached he made preparations to die, making every possible provision for his widow. But he was not to die the first time appointed. He was a member of a famous Indian baseball team, and a number of games in which he was needed had been scheduled. For this reason, and this alone, he was reprieved until the last day of October, in order that he might fulfill his baseball engagements. The games ended, and on a Sunday Watka reported to the Creek authorities in our Indian territory to pay his debt. A press dispatch describes what followed. Watka set out alone to the public execution grounds. In due time he arrived. The crowd was waiting. The prisoner assumed his position on bended knees with his arms tied behind and a bandage over his eyes. The rifle was in the hands of a good marksman. There was a sharp crack, and the white spot marked for the heart was instantly discolored with blood. A story not unlike this is related of a Bay State Tory, Dick Johnson, in our Revolutionary War. After his arrest, upon his personal word to the sheriff, he went about his usual work in and out, and when it was time for him to be tried for high treason, he set off alone and walked through the forests to Springfield to be tried for his life. But a member of the Massachusetts Council, knowing his character, rescued him from the rope. Then, too, we have the old story of the Punic captive, released that he might advise Rome to make peace. He advised Rome not to make peace. But Regulus, what will become of you? I gave my word to return, and I will keep it, but do you refuse to make peace? Who would not go so far to see such men as Damon and Pythias, the one ready to die as a substitute for his friend, and the other voluntarily ready in his place at the death block when the hour struck? When the sacredness of one's word is matched in the attributes of his character throughout, all that constitutes a man, then we find that there is something in a man's life greater than his occupation or his achievements, grander than acquisition or wealth, higher than genius, more enduring than fame. The truest test of civilization, says Emerson, is not the census, nor the size of the cities, nor the crops. No, but the kind of men the country turns out. Montaigne kept his castle gates unbarred during the wars of the Fronde, because his reputation for integrity was better defence than regiment of horse. Your lordships, said Wellington in Parliament, must all feel the high and honourable character of the late Sir Robert Peel. I was long connected with him in public life. I never knew a man in whose truth and justice I had better confidence. Are not the characters of great men the dowry of the nation? Chateaubriand said he saw Washington but once, yet it inspired his whole life. To Washington, Jefferson once wrote, "The confidence of the whole nation centers on you." Of Abraham Lincoln, his great antagonist, Stephen A. Douglas, said that there was safety in the very atmosphere of the man. Manhood is above all riches and overtops all titles. Character is greater than any career. Character must stand behind and back up everything. The sermon, the poem, the picture, the play, none of them is worth a straw without it. I have read, Emerson says, that they who listened to Lord Chatham felt that there was something finer in the man than anything which he said. It was remarked by Disraeli that we put too much faith in systems, and look too little to men. This was the ground of that wise remark of Samuel Johnson to the travellers, in which he belittled the palaces and cities, and even the picture galleries and fine scenery, yet seeing of the eminent men he thought to be of the first importance. Go, said Lord Exis to the young Earl of Rutland, 100 miles to speak with one wise man, rather than 5 miles to see a fair town. The prosperity of a country, says Luther, depends not on the abundance of its revenues, nor on the strength of its fortifications, nor on the beauty of its public buildings, but it consists in the number of its cultivated citizens, in its men of education, enlightenment, and character. The value of personal integrity to the state at a great crisis was singularly illustrated by George Peabody. In 1837, after he moved from America to London, there came a commercial crisis in the United States. Many banks suspended specie payments. Many mercantile houses went to the wall, and thousands more were in great distress. Edward Everett said, the great sympathetic nerve of the commercial world, credit, as far as the United States were concerned, was for the time paralyzed. Probably not half a dozen men in Europe would have been listened to for the moment in the Bank of England upon the subject of American securities, but George Peabody was one of them. His name is already a tower of strength in the commercial world. In those dark days his integrity stood foursquare in every business panic. Peabody retrieved the credit of the state of Maryland, and it might also be said of the United States. His character was the magic wand which in many a case changed almost worthless paper into gold. Merchants on both sides of the Atlantic procured large advances from him, even before the goods consigned to him had been sold. Another illustration is given to us in Cockburn's Memorials of Francis Horner. The valuable and peculiar light in which Horner's history is calculated to inspire every right-minded youth in this. At the age of 38 he was possessed of greater influence than any other private man, admired, beloved, and trusted. And at this early age he died, deplored by all except the heartless and the base. Probably no greater homage was ever paid in Parliament to any deceased member. How was this attained? By rank? He was the son of an Edinburgh merchant. By wealth? Neither he or any of his relatives ever had a superfluous sixpence. By office? He held but one, and that for only a few years, of no influence and with very little pay. By talents? His were not splendid, and he had no genius. Cautious and slow, his only ambition was to be right. By eloquence? He spoke in calm, good taste, without any of the oratory that either terrifies or seduces. By any fascination of manner? His was only correct and agreeable. By what was it, then? Merely by sense, industry, good principles, and a good heart, qualities which no well-constituted mind need ever despair at attaining. It was the force of his character that raised him, and this character was not impressed on him by nature, but formed out of no peculiarly fine elements by himself. There were many in the House of Commons of far greater ability and eloquence, but no one surpassed him in the combination of an adequate portion of these with moral worth. Horner was born to show what moderate powers, unaided by anything whatever except culture and goodness, may achieve, even when these powers were displayed amidst the competition and jealousies of public life. It was Horner whom Sidney Smith described as having the 10 Commandments stamped on his forehead. Nature, says Thackeray, has written a letter of credit upon some men's faces, which is honored wherever presented. You cannot help trusting such men. Their very presence gives confidence. There is a promise to pay in their very faces which gives confidence, and you prefer to another man's endorsement. This quality, which we sometimes speak of as characterizing a man we can tie to, is always at a premium in a democracy. If it was said of the personal character of the first Alexander of Russia that it was equivalent to a constitution, much more in a free land the stability of our institutions depends upon moral excellence embodied in its citizens. "One good, strong, sound man," said old John Brown of the Osawatomie, "is worth 1,000 men without character and building up a state." "Give us a man, young or old, high or low," says Dean Stanley, "on whom we know we can thoroughly depend, who will stand firm when others fail, the friend faithful and true, the adviser honest and fearless, the adversary just and chivalrous. In such a one there is a fragment of the Rock of Ages." Give us a man, young or old, high or low, on whom we know we can thoroughly depend, who will stand firm when others fail, the friend faithful and true, the adviser honest and fearless, the adversary just and chivalrous. I think such a quote is a good reiteration of the entire chapter's reading. What stood out to me in particular was the statement, "Who will stand firm when others fail?" We spoke in our discussion of the last chapter about integrity and the difficulty of doing what is right, not only when we are alone, but also when we are in public or in front of others. Standing firm when others fail, to me, aligns with this, that standing firm means doing what is just and right, even when others around us fail to do so. Focusing on this concept within the scope of the chapter, I believe that we can align it with standing strong in our word, our spoken vow or bond, honoring it when others instead flee or fight. This is a mark of character, of strength, standing firm as an immovable rock, which Marden connects to Jesus Christ, the Rock of Ages. As alluded to, the chapter also makes an inference to a topic close to my own heart, the power and sanctity of one's word and even of one's name. We read stories that show the trust, even power, that came from a spoken word or promise. And that power came from the knowledge that the man or woman speaking the word was immutable and trustworthy. While some of the stories were a bit tragic, they displayed the steadfastness of character and its effect on others. Watka from our opening story is an excellent example. To quote, "Immediately on conviction, the condemned man was released on parole, as others in the same circumstances had been, it being not an infrequent tribal custom. Apparently there was enough emphasis on personal character and the sacred bond of word in Watka's community that the release of murderers was allowed simply on their promise that they would show for their trial and or execution. Watka had many opportunities to run. He could have fled the country, faked his own death, taken revenge, run away. But what did Watka do? He married, set up his affairs for his widow, played baseball. He stayed and accomplished his responsibilities, and then, when it was the appointed time, he dutifully showed up to the execution field to receive a bullet to the heart for his crime. Perhaps in the moment before the trigger was pulled, Watka could have been shown mercy, like in the following story of Dick Johnson. But Watka, despite knowing he was going to his death, honored his word and kneeled before the executioner. When the sacredness of one's word is matched in the attributes of his character throughout, all that constitutes a man, then we find that there is something in a man's life greater than his occupation or his achievements. When we make a promise, a vow, or speak of an action we will undertake, it does not usually end with our willingly walking to our deaths, but there is a form of death, if you will, in some form that occurs with every broken promise or statement of action not followed through. And to deviate a moment, I am thinking of willingly broken promises and actions, done out of free decision not to follow through or through laziness, lack of care, or malice. Life happens, and sometimes you can't follow through. It is unavoidable, as we've discussed before. All we can control is ourselves. And so we can control whether or not we, to the best of our ability, honor and understand the sanctity of the words that we speak and the promises we make. You die when you don't honor your word. Little by little, you, that is your reputation, the level of trust others have in you, whittles away into nothing, until no one trusts you, and you find yourself trying to climb out of a veritable pit. If you cannot be trusted to follow through, who will turn to you? If you don't keep your promise, who will ask anything of you? And because others cannot ask anything of you, they will not give you anything as well. If your name is associated with fickleness, distrust, dishonesty, or laziness, you stand in a room with closed doors, which will not open no matter how much you rattle the knobs or bang on the wood. I'd like to go on a bit of a ramble here now, purely based on my own opinion and conjecture, about the concept of sanctity of word, one's character, and one's name. While reading this chapter, I couldn't help but reflect on our current state of society, and how the concept of personal power and influence is perceived. I personally feel that they are misguided, at least as it seems from an observational standpoint on the United States of America specifically, and specifically through the lens of entertainment media, news, and social media. There feels like there is this almost lust for consumption and hedonism, a never-ending thirst for the newest, shiniest thing, for money, power, endless rows upon rows of stuff and things, and all of it for the validation of the self. You must have the best clothes, a new car for the new year, the latest and best cellular phone whenever it is released, streaming service after service for all the things you want to watch. Oh, and don't forget to make sure that your hobbies are actually side hustles. I personally believe that this mindset has leached into many things, including what were once roles of service. Though I must admit this has been an issue time immemorial for the political landscape. In my observation, what was once considered a role of deep service, such as political office, feels reduced to oligarchical position of power and influence over others, and not in the way Marden describes. This power and influence are a forceful hand of the individual's personal will, crushing everyone underneath their thumb. Marden's description of power, influence, and character has to do with a quiet strength and inner reservation. What makes the people he describes so magnetic is the potential for great power. Power and influence are a sword that they keep sheathed, only wielding when absolutely necessary, and the mere presence of it draws people to them. Today, the swords are not only openly displayed, but waved about, cutting everyone around them. How hollow that all is. How damaging to self-worth and the value of life. Like an invasive species, the premise of personality over character has leached its way into everything, even going so far as turning upon those of good character and standing, and making a mockery of them. And yet how such people are also eagerly searched for. I'll finish my side soapbox with some quotes from the chapter that relate to this mental thread that stuck with me. To quote, "The truest test of civilization, says Emerson, is not the census, nor the size of cities, nor the crops. No, but the kind of men the country turns out." To quote, "It was remarked by Disraeli that we put too much faith in systems and look too little to men." To quote, "The prosperity of a country, says Luther, depends not on the abundance of its revenues, nor on the strength of its fortifications, nor on the beauty of its public buildings, but it consists in the number of its cultivated citizens, in its men of education, enlightenment, and character." To quote, "This quality, which we sometimes speak of as characterizing a man we can tie to, is always at a premium in a democracy." Ruminating over these words, I can't help but again think of the example Marden provides in Francis Horner. To quote, "By what was it then? Merely by sense, industry, good principles, and a good heart, qualities which no well-constituted mind need ever despair of attaining. It was the force of his character that raised him, and this character was not impressed upon him by nature, but formed out of no peculiarly fine elements by himself. Marden asks, what was it then? What was it that attracted people to Francis Horner so? It wasn't wealth, or background, or influence, large IQ, granting of favors, or etc. Horner had none of those things. Marden says that it was merely by. Life can be hard, but life in many ways is a crucible by which we are able to continuously transform and grow. In the case of character, I personally believe that there is a distinct responsibility to grow, that our present and future selves, even future generations, depend on it. If no one will stand firm when others fail, then what sort of world do we build for ourselves, and what sort of generational wounds do we inflict on the children of the future?